Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on European Research Council grants for top researchers from anywhere in the world, brought to you by EURAXESS Australia and New Zealand and the European Research Council. It is, of course, great to see interest from researchers not only in Australia and New Zealand, but also from 64 other countries across the globe. So it's really a good participation we are seeing. And hence, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you joining us from different parts of the world. Please allow me to introduce to you our esteemed guest speakers for today. We have with us joining from Brussels, Dr. Janne Salo, who is the Scientific Officer at the European Research Council Executive Agency. We also have with us joining from Bergen, Norway, Dr. Scott Bremer, who is a research professor at the University of Bergen. Many thanks to both of you for joining in so early from Europe. We appreciate your time. And of course, I'm Nishant Sandilya, Regional Coordinator for EURAXESS Australia and New Zealand. For those who are joining us for the first time, EURAXESS is an initiative of the European Commission that addresses barriers to the mobility of researchers and enhances scientific collaboration between Europe and the rest of the world. So, of course, we provide free information about European research, career opportunities, international collaboration, and networking possibilities. As I always like to say, since all of you are watching this on your laptop or your phone, I'll encourage you to type EURAXESS Australia and New Zealand on your phone with Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, and follow us at least in one of the social media platforms. Now, before we begin, there are a few housekeeping things that I want to explain. I'd encourage all of you to please use the Q&A function, not the chat function, in the interface to ask any questions that you might have. While our speakers are presenting, we'll come back and take your questions after their presentation is done. In terms of the slides and recording, please note that we will provide it to you. However, the recording will not include the Q&A, and hence I'll recommend to you to please stay for the entire duration if you want to hear responses for the common queries that generally applicants have. And I think it's the perfect segue to pass it to Janne, who is going to explain everything that we need to be aware about ERC grant. Janne, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you all hear me well. So I am a scientific officer at the ERC, so I work directly with the evaluation process. I work with the applicants. So if you have any questions relevant, this is your chance to get to the questions after the presentation. So I will give this about half an hour summary of the ERC, and then we'll continue with the rest of the program. I'll just share my screen. Let's see how that works. Okay, so thank you very much. So I'm giving a quick tour on what ERC is, how it works, how the grants work, and what options there are for people currently or based outside Europe or coming from outside Europe. Like Nishan said, we have a budget currently of about 16 billion euros. That's over 7 years. It's part of the European Union's larger research framework program called Horizon Europe. And the idea is basically that Horizon Europe is the whole research thing in Europe. And of course, the politicians want to keep lots of priorities what to do with this, but they have earmarked 17%, so about 16 billion euros currently, for ERC that is a little bit thing apart from the rest of the framework program. Because it's basically a part where the politicians have agreed not to interfere on how that is used. It's delegated to ERC Scientific Council, who represents scientific community, and it doesn't have any priorities. It doesn't have any political goals. Its only goal is to target so what you call frontier research or blue sky research, which is entirely defined by the research community based on whatever research proposals we get. But first, before I go to the details, I'd like to quote one study, there are others, that has compared different funding models and how the way we fund research makes a big difference. And this study compares Howard Hughes Medical Institute and National Institute of Health, which both fund research, but in a different way and with different purpose. And Howard Hughes Medical Institute tolerates early failure, rewards long-term success, and gives its appointees great freedom to experiment. Whereas National Institute of Health traditionally is more targeted research, it's more subject to short review cycles, predefined deliverables, and renewal policies unforgiving of failure. Okay, the study is old, things may have changed, but the idea is to look at how different approaches change the research outcome. And the outcome was, in this case, that the Harvard Medical Institute investigators produce high impact papers at much higher rate than a control group in National Institute of Health, and the direction of the research changes in ways that suggest that the program induces them to explore novel lines of inquiry. And in principle, that's what the European Research Council wants to do. We are not locking the researchers with their grants to a strict predetermined research, but we basically take proposals where we want to have ideas that have a groundbreaking potential. They need to be feasible somehow, but we are very flexible in terms of changes as long as you stay within this larger scope, and in that way the researchers can replan, redirect their research with lots of flexibility, and actually work very well, for instance, during COVID, because there was a discussion whether we should have a separate COVID research program, but actually we had more than 200 projects that approached COVID topics from completely unexpected directions, because the researchers that just followed the time and went for it, and we were very happy that this happened without any interference on our part. Now, this is the Scientific Council of the ERC. They are all renowned researchers, so they decide how ERC funds research. They can't take policies on topics. They can't decide that now everything goes to energy research. They can't do that, but they will lay down the rules that allow all research fields to profit from the ERC. Our granting scheme is very simple. We have 3 course grants, so to say: starting grants, consolidated grants, and advanced grants. They're basically all the same thing. You get money for 5 years to fund your research team, your research yourself, on a topic that you want to work on. The only difference between these 3 grants is that they are for different age brackets, so that we compare, well, apples with apples and oranges with oranges, so to say, but also so that we manage somehow the size of the pool, so that we a starting grant call stays within limits that it's manageable to evaluate. Consolidated grants it's a little bit smaller, it's usually a little bit easier, and advanced grant is just, it's not as small, but it's slightly smaller than the others. But the logic is just to keep them all manageable, so that we can keep the high quality of the evaluation. Then you have another slightly different grant, which is synergy grants, where I actually work now. And the logic of synergy is that you have 2 to 4 principal investigators who put together a larger group, but it's only driven by the research itself. So we don't have any requirements on you should be from different countries, from different disciplines, from different whatever it is. It's entirely, if your research proposal requires 4 strong principal investigators leading different interlocked topics of the same research program, you can go for synergy. And synergy is also interesting for people from outside Europe, because one of the 4 with their entire team, etc., can actually be entirely outside Europe. 3, the others need to be in Europe, either European Union or associated countries, but the 4th one, or the one of the group, can be anywhere. We actually have 3 synergy grants currently running with an Australian participant and Australian team entirely working, obviously outside Europe, in Australia. The last one is proof of concept, which is again, a completely different thing. It's not a frontier research grant at all in the way that we see it. It is a grant for those who already have an ERC grant. We don't ask you to provide a societal impact. We don't ask you to provide commercialization, but if you come up with something in your grant that has a potential to be put on market or in applied use or whatever it is, we have a proof of concept grant that gives you a little bit of extra incentive to push towards that direction. So it's a fixed grant, 150,000 euros for a year and a half, and that's for market studies, prototyping, testing, standardization, patenting, whatever you need to do to work towards commercialization. But that's only for those who already have an ERC grant, so it's not sort of a grant for a larger group of people. So once you have an ERC grant, then you might get interested in POC. The difference with these grants in terms of eligibility is that starting round and consolidated grants have a fixed eligibility window based on the certified date of the successful defense of your PhD. So starting round is 2 to 7 years, consolidated is 7 to 12 years. There are some exception rules, some career breaks, etc. If you are interested in applying, then I suggest that you look at the evaluation material where all this is specified in detail. If you ask for an extension because of maternity leave, for instance, you need to provide exact documentation so that we can count exactly how many extra days you get. So you will always need to provide the proof if you ask for a career window extension. So why apply for an ERC grant? You can choose your own research topic. You don't need to tailor it to whatever the political whims happen to be at the time, or what your national agency or an EU agency, wherever you apply, says that, okay, we want you to focus on something. You can really choose if you want. You can do archaeology, you can do mathematics, anything in between. It's all your choice. You need to set up your own research program and submit a proposal, and then it will be evaluated for scientific excellence. The grant will give you true financial autonomy for 5 years. Well, subject to the host institution rules, but the host institution, whoever hosts your team, needs to agree that they give you the autonomy to run your project. You choose who you hire and who you recruit from somewhere else, what equipment to buy. It's your money. It's used within the framework of your host institution, but you can negotiate how to use it. You can also take it with you. If you get an ERC grant, you get a better offer somewhere else, you are not happy how things are going, family reasons take you to a different country, as long as you are, well, in Europe for most grants, you can do it. If you are the extra +1 for synergy grants, then you can basically move anywhere in the world. You can attract your own team members. It's very important. Of course, you usually have an easy access to researchers in your own university, but you can recruit globally. And many successful ERC grantees, they actually have a very active recruitment policy. So rather than passively just advertising, they talk to people, they try to find who is exactly the one who they want in their team. Like I said, your grant is portable within Europe, and usually it helps you also to attract other funding. But of course, our logic is that you will fund your research, this project, with the ERC grant. You are not required to get any additional funding from somewhere else. Anyone from anywhere in the world can apply. But as I said, the individual grants, you need to be based in Europe. But it's only for a significant part of your work, so it's at least 50% of your time, but you can still keep a team elsewhere if you like. And you can even fund your team elsewhere as a secondary beneficiary. So you don't you can have half team in Europe, half team somewhere else if that makes sense for your project. It's subject to approval from our side, but as long as it's beneficial for the project, we tend to take the side of the applicant on that. You can also apply an additional startup fund if you are coming from outside Europe to moving to Europe. If you have a lab somewhere else, you need to bring equipment, bring people, whatever it is, you get an extra resource for that. And we have an arrangement which is called ERC implementing arrangement. It's a word that doesn't mean absolutely anything, but it's meant to mean that there's a visiting program in Australia. It's managed by NHMRC and ARC to visit ERC teams in Europe and stay a couple of months, maybe half a year, also to learn as a sort of short postdoc kind of thing. And usually it comes with a constraint that then you need to submit your own ERC proposal. But this is managed nationally, so it's not managed by us. We just facilitate a little bit this contact. So you need to be in touch with your national contact point to see if this possibility exists. So what do you get with the ERC grant? Like I said, we are funding 100% of your project. You can have your own salary to the part that you work for the project. If you work 50% of your time, you can charge 50% of your salary. Equipment, consumables, team members, travel, publications, all included. You can have additional beneficiaries also outside Europe when justified. And your university gets a 25% overhead as an indirect cost for their support to your team that usually covers office rent, secretary, assistants, or whatever, like the infrastructure around you. And I'll just go quickly back to the earlier slide. So the basic grant size are up to 1.5 million for starting grants, 2 million euros for consolidator, 2.5 advanced, and up to 10 million for synergy grants. But you have this extra 1 million for individual grants and 4 million up to synergy for specific, usually non-personnel related cost. This is a recognition from our side that although we like to keep the system, the grant scheme, same for all fields, for all researchers, we of course recognize that if you need to do an Arctic mission on a boat for 6 months, or you need to buy expensive laboratory equipment or whatever it is, there are certain kinds of research, certain expenses that clearly go beyond what this core grant covers. So you can justify, and it needs to be approved by the evaluation panel, but you can justify on 4 different grounds additional up to 1 million and synergy up to 4 million. Evaluation is done in panels. We have currently 28 panels. I'm not going to go through them because the panels, how to say, partly don't matter. The panels are not funding priorities. They are just a sort of a division of projects to groups of people who can manage best their evaluation. So the budget panel budget is proportional to demand. We don't have a policy saying that we want to fund math, but more math than cell biology. It all goes in proportion to demand. You should choose your panel that is best placed to appreciate the groundbreaking nature of your proposal. We can move proposals to different panels. If the panel chairs think that this proposal is better evaluated somewhere else, we can do it. But in 95+% of cases, we follow whatever the applicants say. You can indicate if you feel that the choice of panel is not obvious, or your proposal is interdisciplinary, or it requires some additional expertise, you can indicate a secondary panel. And you can also indicate ERC keywords from other panels. And this is purely for the purpose that you can be more sure that we will have additional reviews from experts in the fields covered by other panels. This is, you don't get any extra points for being interdisciplinary in your proposal or emphasizing that this covers lots of different topics. That's not a criteria for us. This is just to make sure that we have the right expertise on the first round of evaluation. So how does the evaluation work? Excellence is the only criterion we use. It's divided in two. We look at the project and we look at the person. How you present this is in two parts proposal. We have part 1, B1, that is evaluating the first part of the evaluation. And if you survive that part, then your second part of the proposal will be open. But beware, the first round, the first B1 part, the first part needs to be complete in the sense that you convince the panel to go further with your proposal. They don't have access to the second part of the proposal when they take their decisions. And you basically present two things. One is your proposal. Focus on the groundbreaking nature, why this proposal makes a big difference in its own field. You should know your competitors. You need to know what the competing work is, what your proposal should be compared with. You need to outline the methodological approach, which means that you need to have a convincing way to present why your approach is feasible. It might be groundbreaking to go to Mars, but if you don't convince the panel that you have a feasible approach to get there, it doesn't matter that your goal is groundbreaking. You need to have a path there. But you only have 5 pages. You can't go into the details, but you need to convince the panel, get them sufficiently interested that they open the second part and want to see the details. Why is this timely? Has something changed that this is now possible? It wasn't before possible, or before we didn't even ask those questions? You need to convince the panel again. And it's very important to be clear here, because the panel members act as generalists. You might have a direct specialist in the panel for your field, but you might not. You never know. The panels are relatively broad, so you have to make sure that also the non-specialists will understand why this proposal should be put further. And the other part of the evaluation is the principal investigator. We look at the ability to conduct groundbreaking research, evidence of creativity, scientific expertise, etc. But the focus is now clearly on your capacity to run the project. So you can select up to 10 recent research outputs and choose them carefully. You may have been working in a large group that publishes a lot in Nature and everybody gets a name on the paper. But if you have 10 Nature papers and you are always in the middle of 20 people, it doesn't tell much about you. So maybe you take one of them or two of them, but then you should also have papers or whatever the research output in your field is that shows your initiative, your leadership, your expertise on the things that is needed for your project. If you're saying that I'm doing the spectroscopy of some chemical processes, maybe you choose some papers where you have done exactly the necessary groundwork, even if it was not highly cited or whatever it is, but it shows that you have the knowledge, you have your hands on in the field. You need to explain your collaborations, but just a little word of warning here. Collaboration for this project, you should drive the collaboration. You are not somebody else's collaborator. The others are your collaborators. So that's also an important thing to keep in mind. And you also have a chance to provide some what we call context. Could be unusual career paths, career breaks, service to community that take your time, may give a little dent on your publication record, but maybe there's a good reason to that. this is not something that gives you points or anything. We don't use points by default, but it's not, we don't reward you for it, but it helps the panel to understand, for instance, the metrics or your research output or whatever it is, if there is something unusual. If you have just a gap of 3 years in your publishing history with no explanation whatsoever, the panel might ask questions, but maybe you can explain it. Just one comment on the collaborations. Please always confirm with the collaborators before you submit your proposal. You need to have a written email agreement with them. We might ask that if it comes to the third one. Now the second part of the proposal, you made it for the first round. Now you have your full proposal. You have about 12 pages to go through your methodology, work plan, case studies, so that you know the alternatives to your approach, you know why your approach is better. Explain your panel team members, how you are organizing your work. This is basically to convince the panel that you have really thought through the details of how you're going to run your project. You also need to present a budget. So for that, always talk with your host institution so that you get it right. It's very easy to make mistakes there, and they just cause confusion afterwards. So this is more like a standard full proposal. It's not super long, but it should explain all the big questions. In starting advanced and consolidated grants, if you get to the second point, you always get an invitation to the interview. In Synergy, there's another step, so there's another screen. The interviews are in step 3, but in any case, all applicants are interviewed in the last step. And prepare very well for the presentation. Everybody else does, you have to do it as well. So prepare a presentation. If the panel asks for one, remember that you might have specialists, you might have generalists in the panel. Keep everybody on board. If you have some new relevant results or data or something, you should probably explain it. I'm not telling you to do it, it's your choice, you have your own strategy, but it's probably good to show that there's progress. You might get very detailed questions, or you could get more world-encompassing questions. It depends on how the panel wants to go. But make sure that you know what has happened in the field since you submitted. Maybe there is somebody else is doing the same thing. There's a new approach that was not there yet when you submitted. The panel might ask, how is this different? How does your work relate to what these guys are publishing at the same time? So be prepared for that. Follow the timing and all instructions. Everybody else does, and it stands out if you don't. Prepare and practice. Make sure that you have a mock interview in the same setting. Some people have several. Discuss your proposal with trusted colleagues. It's sometimes good to talk to colleagues who are not exactly from the field, because they might see better what is not clear in your proposal. Make a long list of questions that you expect to get, collect them from others, and make sure that you can answer them. And talk to the ERC grantees who might be around you and ask for their experience. That's very important. Okay, I have about 3 minutes, I guess, so I'll go maybe a bit faster for the rest. There are some recent changes from 2024. They are not hugely critical for the applicants. Good to know, but I'm not going to go into the details of them. Just as an example that we have grants from outside Europe. So like I said, we had 3 Synergy grants in Australia. I'm very much looking forward to visiting any of them as a Synergy coordinator, but currently we are not visiting projects outside Europe very much. But You never know. We might come for a visit. A little bit more data. So here we have ERC proposals evaluated from Australia and New Zealand. Of course, the non-European applicants are often Americans or Chinese, some Russian, Indian, but Australia and New Zealand are definitely on the map. There are some grantees from Australia and New Zealand as well, but these, apart from the 3 synergy, they are all in Europe. We have team members in the ERC teams all over the world. Australia has about 3% as far as we know the statistics. This is not exactly something that we have a direct control on, so that's based on data available for us. We are in the process of opening the first evaluations for the 2025 cycle. So we have starting grants deadline in about 20 days. And then we have a consolidator advance coming over the year. The synergy is also in November. It might be a bit tight schedule to start thinking about it now, but you never know. We have some videos on YouTube that explain how the evaluation happens, what you should think about. This is not, don't take it as legal advice because they're a little bit old. They have not been updated for the current sort of legal text. We are working on a new set of videos, but they are still, they give a good flavor of how things work. Here are some links you might want to follow. And okay, there's some data. Time is out. I think I leave it to you. Thank you, and hand over back to Nishant.
Thank you very much, Janne. I think it was a very thorough presentation, and I'm sure that the audience found it very useful. The number of questions that I'm seeing is really good, and also the questions that you're asking are very pertinent ones. So please keep them coming and write them in the Q&A so that at the end of the presentations, we'll come back and take it and address all of them. I think without further ado, I think I will now switch to our second presenter for today, Dr. Scott Bremer. Scott has been an ERC grantee himself and a very successful one. So I think I'll pass on the presenter privilege to you, Scott, so that you can start explaining how you went about putting forward your proposal, what you did, and what others should do so that they can also become successful when they are putting forward the proposal. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Nishant. So, oh, sorry, let me just, can everyone see my screen? Is everything clear?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you very much, Janne, for a really thorough presentation. I'm not sure how much I can add, except that, yes, that's what happens. I went through that process, and that's accurate. But perhaps I'll give a little bit of my flavor as a New Zealander. You can probably hear an ex-New Zealander at least. So a little bit of my route of how I ended up applying for an ERC and why I think it's a really fantastic opportunity and why I would encourage others to do so as well. I work now as a research professor at the University of Bergen in the fjords of Norway, and also at a Norse Research Centre here, also in Bergen. And just recently I became chair of the Young Academy of Europe, which is an academy that typically approaches ERC studying grantees as a kind of as our pool that we recruit from. So we are a group of ambitious young scholars or early mid-career scholars who are outspoken on science policy and science for policy. So yes, there are many other opportunities, and I'll get onto that soon, that the ERC starting grant can kind of segue you into. So again, I think maybe I will just start by saying a little bit my path of how I ended up in Europe in the first place. I would say that it's important to note that I wasn't sitting in New Zealand and deciding to apply for an ERC studying grant. I was already in Europe. So way back in 2007, I began a PhD at Massey University in New Zealand, but in a co-tutelle style agreement with the University of Versailles-Saint-Quentin-Yvelines in France, and conducted that PhD as kind of part-time in France, part-time in New Zealand between 2007 and 2011. And through that, ended up kind of piggybacking, or rather kind of, what would be the word? Hopping over from France into Bergen here in Norway in the last year of my PhD. And I moved here and began working at the Center for the Study of the Sciences and the Humanities while finishing my PhD. So I was kind of finishing that on nights and weekends, as a lot of people know this challenge when your money's run out and you're in your last year and you're still going. So I was working the days as a research assistant here at the center, which you can see a picture of here in Bergen, and then finishing my PhD at nights. But anyway, by the end of 2011, I'd finished my PhD, or early 2012. I defended, I can't remember, but I'd submitted by 2011, and basically worked into fitted into a research position. So I went from a research assistant to then kind of leading work packages and leading aspects of research projects, mainly Horizon projects, but also projects funded under the Norwegian Research Council. And one of those was an ERC starting grant, which I'll talk about in a moment. And since this year, I was finally kind of finished my assessment and moved into a research professor role. So I guess I've had a little bit of a particular, well, I guess every career is relatively particular, right? We all have our own individual life ways. And so in this sense, I wasn't one of those academics that's hopped over 4 different postdocs in 4 different corners of the world. I did find myself in Bergen right after the PhD, or even overlapping on that, settled down here, started a family, had children, and this is home for me. So I want to keep working and living in Bergen. And so this is why I'm now in this kind of research professor role and conducting projects. That's what's keeping me here. Oops. So what about the starting grant then in particular? So as I say, I've been working on several projects, leading projects in all sorts of places over the past, oh gosh, 13, 14 years since I moved to Bergen. And one of them was an ERC starting grant. How did I end up thinking about an ERC starting grant? I have to admit that, because it is based on, really excellent researchers, and it's associated, there's a lot of prestige associated with these grants. And you have this image of this, amazing scholar who's, publishing 500 things a year and only in Nature and things. And then you feel a little bit humbled by that and think, well, I'm just publishing my couple of things a year in these journals. And so I remember thinking that my CV was not stellar enough for an ERC starting grant, but we actually had some consultants, I guess, coming around and doing seminars on ERC as a potential pot of money for people to apply for. And at the end, they had kind of individual meetings with those of us for 10 minutes. And they said, no, but your CV is really good. And okay, you're only starting. Gosh, it's only 3 or 4 years after your PhD. You're not supposed to have 700 publications yet, or only, very few people do. And no, it's really good. So that was actually, for me, probably a really important point to make, is that maybe a lot of us are put off applying for an ERC because we think it's, we're not there. But actually, it's worthwhile talking to your colleagues and others and thinking about, well, actually, maybe I do have a unique and a particular CV that does make my contribution to the field quite unique and important. So maybe it is worthwhile. Anyway, I'd just been leading a climate adaptation project in northeast Bangladesh for 3 or 4 years, And I'd kind of had this idea about seasons and seasonal calendars through this. And this stuck with me and kind of percolated in the back of my head. And I think that's another important point that Janne also made, that these are not kind of things you sit down 2 months before the proposal deadline and go, right, an idea. What idea can I, usually from all the other ERC grantees I've talked with, this is something that you've thought, what about this? And you've raised it in different settings. I mean, you've raised it with your colleagues and they've all said like, yeah, that's a funny one. And usually it's actually quite a simple idea. It's a kind of glaring hole. It's something that you can actually talk about, for example, with your friends or family at a barbecue and say, oh yeah, I'm thinking I'm going to look at this. And people go, yeah, interesting. It almost should be something like where people think, no one's done this already? Surely this is something someone's looked at already. But somehow it's been overlooked, or it's been taken for granted, perhaps. And so these are typically, in my experience, and I know a lot of ERC, other people holding ERCs, something that is quite typical to these ideas. I was lucky to get some support from the University of Bergen to write this. And that helped because I took about 3 months to write this, probably. Again, I mean, around other things, but I would say I was working over 50% of my time writing this for about 3 months, my starting grant. So again, these things take time, and to take time to do it well. I did get this advice, and I think this advice that I pass on is that I thought, listen, I'm going to write my dream project, assuming I won't get it, but just kind of, it's the opportunity. I had this, again, it was a bit lucky I had this opportunity to kind of be paid to write this for over, a bit over 3 months. But what would be, if I could name my dream project, what would it be? And then you think, okay, I probably won't get it, but at least I will have put on paper what is my dream project, and I can use that, I can appropriate that later for other project proposals and things like that, and kind of tailor it. So I took that as the opportunity, and I was lucky enough to get it, actually. But what that saw me do, well, I thought, well, what's my dream project? Who am I? Since it's an individual grant, what would make a perfect project for me, knowing, places I know and have experience with? Well, I'd lived in Norway for some time by then, and I grew up in New Zealand. So I thought, well, let's have comparative studies in New Zealand and Norway. So I was able to bring in a New Zealand case study. I had my interview in 2018, and that was in Brussels then. Now it's mainly online. And then I had the calendars project between 2019 and it just finished now in June, and I'm finishing up the reporting on that now. I would say as well that if I'm a bit tired or a bit fuzzy this morning, it's because I actually last year in November put in a consolidated grant, an ERC consolidated grant proposal, and that went to interview, and I had my interview late last night, late for me at least. I'm not a night thinker, so that was kind of 6:30 till 7 last night. I had my ERC consolidated grant interview, and that was online. But it was a fairly similar experience to when I sat in Brussels, actually. 25 minutes, a lot of questions, but we can talk about that later. Okay, so why was this starting grant so important for me? Well, it gave me the space and freedom to be creative. A lot of the other projects, you're responding to societal challenges or policy demands, and so you're quite blinkered into focusing on what certain policy outcomes you need to support and things, and that's important work, and it's also enjoyable work. But here you could you had this immense freedom, and you could say, well, honestly, all of the work on adaptation is on these kind of municipalities or farming groups or something. But what about the groups that are never looked at? What about artist communes or schools? Or so you had the freedom to look at institutions that were often kind of put to the side because they weren't seen as this kind of policy priority. It's an opportunity to build a fantastic tight-knit team. Of course, this comes with a lot of challenges as well, especially over the last 5 years with the pandemic and so on. That was quite challenging to lead a team, half in New Zealand, half in Norway. And okay, I mean, you learn a lot. I think designing this consolidated grant proposal I presented last night for interview, that proposal looks quite a bit different to my starting grant proposal, given all the lessons I learned along the way about how to build a team and kind of nurture that team. Networks. I have to say the phone started to ring more when I got the grant. You were invited to more seminars. You were invited, you were able to reach out to people. You had this freedom to kind of, oh well, listen, let's start working with this group in Canada, or and so you were able to really strengthen your networks. That because you had the time to look up. You weren't focused only on your own work and delivering on those deliverables for a consortium project or on the teaching. You could look up. You could build a fuller CV. Like I said, I was invited to join the Young Academy of Europe, and this was an interest of mine on the careers of early and mid-career researchers and how we can contribute to science policy in Europe. So I was approached by the Young Academy. I joined the Young Academy and went on the board quite early, and now I chair that academy. And this is a fantastic opportunity to be working with the ERC, actually, with the Initiative for Science in Europe, with COARA, with the Marie Curie Alumni Association, with the Eurodoc, with all of these different European science policy organizations, and kind of work towards strengthening research in Europe. I could find my own niche. I could really find what is it that I do that is maybe contributes to the field and is different to what others are doing in the field. And of course, there was some frustration. It's a terribly painful process, actually, reporting on your grant, because there are so many paths you could have followed because of this freedom. And maybe you started doing work in a certain direction. We did some citizen science work, and that was going so well. And then the pandemic happened, and then it kind of lost steam. And there's this kind of sadness and pain in looking back on, and we never got to kind of follow that through and publish on that. But oh wow, what an opportunity this afforded. So yeah. Okay, a couple of quick slides. I don't need to say much on this because actually Janne had basically went through most of this. But I have been doing, since I got the starting grant, a lot of kind of, I guess, advocacy work for helping people who are interested in ERC grants. At the University of Bergen, I'm on these kind of mock panels, which Janne was just talking about, helping people practice for the interview. But also at the Young Academy of Europe, we've been taking a lot of initiatives to kind of broaden and head east, actually, to the EU 13 countries, which have a lower representation of grants. But also, why not, like today, looking outside of Europe. Again, this is things that mainly Janne has already said, but I would emphasize that it's an individual grant. It's your idea and why you're best placed to explore it. And Janne was talking about the narrative CV. I actually think this is a fantastic opportunity because as much as a lot of those other metrics are important, citations and agencies and things, or have been important, I really like the move, and I think the ERC has been so important in pushing this move away from looking at those metrics alone and looking what's your unique research path, your unique path that took you to where you are and put you in a position to be able to explore and answer questions that maybe others haven't, and we all have those kind of life ways, if you like. And so you can really kind of tease this out, and it's not just publications. I put forward in my narrative CV for this consolidated grant a lot of other work, coming up with PhD courses or edited books which were more popular science books, and actually books like that I'm most proud of. I'm more proud of those actually than I am of some of my more cited scientific papers, because I really feel I'm a transdisciplinary scholar and I want to put my money where my mouth is and really produce outputs like that. I've said about the idea. The idea is, we've heard from the ERC before, the idea is the most important. The CV is important, but the idea is the most important. And like I said, it's this screamingly simple idea that people seem to have overlooked. It's a team project, not a consortium project. That's important, because a lot of the time we're used to writing work packages and, people, you take care of this and we'll take care of this project, where, as an ERC project, you're a team and you work together. It smudges these boundaries between people working on things. It's not incremental, so it shouldn't be more of the same. It shouldn't be, Smith and Brown have been doing this for 10 years, but they've not done it yet in New Zealand. So let's do it in New Zealand. This is more of a kind of incremental thing. It really should be something that's a giant leap beyond the state of the art. But I think it is important to show as an individual, your run-up to that giant leap. So it's not as though you've been working on architecture for a long time, and then suddenly you're going to do sociology of climate change. And then people say, yeah, but it's nothing like what you've done before. So you should be able to show that, okay, I have been working towards this. I have done work in this direction, but it only goes so far. And I see the potential for work way out here. So there is a run up to this giant leap. Bold ambition, but feasible plan. That's been said. Last slide. Why I think you should apply. Again, some people I know from talking to other scholars and people around me are put off applying because it is quite daunting to apply for this really prestigious grant. But it has around a 10% success rate last time I checked. And if I look at some of the success rates of grant schemes elsewhere, I mean, that's pretty worthwhile, you know. And actually, if you make it to the second stage, then then you have an even higher, chance of success, and you're able to kind of reapply afterward again if you're not successful at the second stage. And what I really liked about it is that it's a rigorous process. A lot of us in research know that there is hard work and rigor, but there's also luck in research, right? If you get the wrong reviewer or they stood up with the wrong foot that day, there's a sense that if you're just down to one or two reviewers, that they might give you an unfair review, and that's tough. But in this process, since it's so rigorous, since you've got that first round, and then it's going to go to what, 5, 7 reviewers in your field at the second stage, and then the interview with a panel of, there were 17 people sitting around the table last night with me. So if you do get this grant, you feel like you've earned it, and you feel like you didn't get there by chance, or you didn't get kicked out by bad luck. You've really gone through this process. To me, that was a good feeling. You have access to these European research networks and facilities, and you bring this, I've put Pacific perspective, because I assume I'm mainly talking to New Zealanders and Australians, but also people in the Pacific Islands. And I have brought that. Actually, I can see how my life experience living or growing up in New Zealand comes up in my research. Yeah, I won't say too much more on that. We can say later more. Again, you find your academic niche and you give your career a huge boost. Like I said, I joined the Young Academy. I was able to join, I started to join editorial boards on journals. I edited certain special issues, which I hadn't done before. I edited some books. So all these things that you didn't have time to do when you were so focused on the daily grind of putting out deliverables on a project or teaching, you have the perspective to step back, the space to do those academic activities you haven't had before. And for me, this means getting excited about science. And I guess it's not a coincidence that quite a few people I know who have had starting grants then go on to get consolidated grants or other ERC grants, because they have had that immense privilege, the space to be creative. And then, when you have this creative mindset, you can look broader, and then you apply for follow-up grants. Okay, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Scott. I think the last part where you mentioned that get excited about science, I think everybody would agree when they heard you speak. We could sense the passion of your research. So thank you very much for bringing in that. And I am sure that a lot of people will also take it with them when they are putting forward a proposal or something. Thank you very much, Janne. I think this is the first time that we were able to address each and every question because we're always time bound. So thank you very much for staying with us longer and addressing all the questions. I'm sure that it has been an extremely insightful session. I think that brings us to the end of this session. As earlier said, of course, you'll receive the slides and the recording. Of course, the recording does not include the Q&A. So those who stayed were, of course, benefited. When you exit the webinar, there are 2 survey questions that we would really request you to answer, because that will allow us to also tailor our webinars in the future. To wrap up, of course, please have a look at our social media platforms to get notified of such news and events from the European research landscape in the future. I think that brings us to the end of our webinar. And thank you once again, Janne, and of course, Scott as well. Scott had to leave. But to everybody who has stayed for this almost 100 minutes of this session, it has been a pleasure having you. And thank you once again, Janne. Have a good day, all of you, and take care.
Yeah, thank you very much.